What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Pokemon TCG Pocket video. So now that we've had Space-Time Smackdown for a little bit over a week now, I thought it'd be a good time to look at the meta. Now that we have a good amount of data to look at from a bunch of community tournaments, I'm taking a look over at PokemonMeta.com. I've used this website a bunch of times to look at metadata. So shout out to PokemonMeta.com for putting this data together. I'll leave a link down to it in the description below if you want to check it out for yourself. But essentially, this website just uses objective data from community tournaments that are ran over on play.limitlesstcg.com, where all the big community tournaments are ran. Without further ado, let's just go ahead and dive into the tier list. All right, so starting off at tier 1, we only got one deck in there, and surprisingly enough, it's not Darkrai, it's actually Celebi EX and Exeggutor EX. Although Celebi is shown here in the front here, I think Exeggutor is actually the main card in this deck. And don't pay attention to this top main deck here. This is going to show more than 20 cards. This is just kind of showing what are the most common cards that people are playing in these decks. So 100% of the decks are playing Exeggutor EX, Professor's Research, Erica, and then it kind of drops off from there, right? So don't pay attention to this. This is not exactly like a 20 card deck list. This is just the most popular cards people are playing in these decks. Now, what I actually want to look at is if you scroll down, you can take a look at a bunch of different deck lists that got recent placements in tournaments. So I'm going to click on this one here real quick. So this is a top 32 Meta Monday tournament, about 341 players. And yeah, this is pretty much what I have been seeing as of late. If you watch my last video, I talked about how I just absolutely got stomped by a deck very similar to this. So there's a couple reasons why this deck is so good. First off, it's a grass type deck, so it's going to counter those Darkrai decks since Darkrai is weak to grass type Pokemon. Second, it plays Exeggutor EX, which was already one of the best EX Pokemon in the previous expansions, but I think in this expansion, Exeggutor EX has just gotten even better with the addition of some cards like Cyrus, Pokemon Communication, Giant Cape. Exeggutor is just an absolute beast of a Pokemon if you're going first. Most decks in this game actually like going second, but Exeggutor EX actually likes going first since you can evolve first, attack for 1 energy, and do 40 to 80 damage. And it has a ton of HP. You can give it 20 additional HP with the Giant Cape. You can heal it for 50 with the Erica, so it's very bulky as well. It's going to be good against those decks that like to do small bursts of damage, but it's also going to lose to those decks that like to do one big blast of damage, such as Charizard EX, for example. And then this is running one copy of Celebi EX. I've seen people run 1 to 2 Celebi, maybe run 1 Celebi, 1 Shaman, or maybe run a Mew EX instead of the Celebi. This essentially is just another backup attacker for you, where sometimes Exeggutor EX on his own might not get the job done. But it's also really good with Exeggutor EX since you can just put 1 energy on Exeggutor EX. You can have Celebi in your backline and you're just charging up that Celebi, right? While your Exeggutor is taking damage in the front line, and then your Celebi, once it's ready to go, you'll probably have a bunch of energy on it and you're going to be flipping a bunch of heads. And then for the rest of the deck here, 2 copies of Erica. I mean, that's pretty standard. I would say every grass deck at this point. And the fact that we are running so few Pokemon, this deck runs only 5 Pokemon total, right? Means that we can run a lot of trainer cards in here. So this deck has a lot of utility as well. It's running double Cyrus and double Sabrina. I actually like these cards a lot, especially when they're played together, because there are going to be times where your opponent's Pokemon on the bench don't have any damage on them, so you can't Cyrus them. In that case, you use Sabrina, but there are going to be some times where you do some damage with Exeggutor EX. Your opponent retreats that Pokemon, and then you just pull it back to the active spot with Cyrus. So double Cyrus and double Sabrina is just absolutely disgusting with this deck. We are running 1 copy of Leaf here. You actually don't even need to really retreat with this deck. I've seen some decks that just don't even run Leaf or X speed at all, because once you have Exeggutor EX in the front line, like he's just there until he gets knocked out, you know. And then if he gets knocked out, then you put in the Celebi EX or your second Exeggutor EX. And then 2 copies of Potion for some more healing, 2 Pokeballs, 1 Pokemon Communication for some extra consistency, just so we do find that Exeggutor EX to evolve the Execute, because the Execute is very vulnerable with only 50 HP, and Giant Cape just to give you some more HP. So this deck is absolutely nasty. I think we're going to be seeing a ton of Exeggutor EX in these upcoming tournaments. And going over to the win rate versus top decks real quick. So the best matchups are going to be a 76% win rate against Marshadow Magnezone. So that's the fighting decks that have been running Magnezone. They'll run things like Marshadow, maybe Hitmonchan, Hitmonlee, maybe Lucario as well. This is going to be really good against those types of decks because, again, like I was saying earlier, this is going to be good against these decks that like to do just little bursts of damage, right? Like the strongest card in that deck is going to be Magnezone, which does 110 damage. And Exeggutor EX has 160 HP, 180 with a giant cape. So you don't have a way to one-shot Exeggutor EX. And the decks that don't have a way to one-shot Exeggutor EX are going to struggle because you're going to have to commit multiple attacks into that Exeggutor, and they can just keep healing with the Potion and Erica, right? So that's why Exeggutor EX has a really good matchup against these fighting decks. And then we also see a 72% win rate against Weavile EX and a 54% against Darkrai Greninja. So Weavile, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. It's just that Weavile is weak to grass. Naturally, you're just kind of favored in that matchup, right? Darkrai Greninja, 54% win rate is good, but it's not as drastic as the 72 or the 76% win rate with the other decks. And I think that's due to the fact that Greninja in the backline can kind of just chip away at the Exeggutor EX to where it can get it within lethal range for your Darkrai. But you're still going to be favored into this matchup, again, because of that natural type advantage. And then looking at the worst matchups, of course, the worst matchup here is going to be Charizard EX, having only a 26% win rate against Charizard EX. That's, yeah, definitely your worst matchup because Charizard can just blow out of the water Exeggutor EX in one hit or Celebi EX in one hit. Not much else to say there. Palkia EX, a 44% win rate. This kind of makes sense as well, depending on like what kind of version of Palkia they're running, because Palkia EX's big move does 150 damage. Exeggutor EX has 160 HP. So if they chip away at you beforehand with either maybe like a Rocky Helmet, or maybe they're playing Greninja, or they're just doing some damage with Palkia's slash attack, right? Then you can be put into lethal range of that Palkia EX 150 damage attack. So that does make sense there. And then this deck has a 45% win rate against Gyarados EX. I think it's kind of the similar thing with the Palkia deck here, is that with the Gyarados deck, your opponent can chip away at you with the Druddigon and the Greninja, and then Gyarados is going to do 140 damage. So at that point, they could probably chip you down to 140 HP to where they could one-shot you with the Gyarados EX deck. So like I was saying, the decks that this is going to be good against are those decks that like to do just, you know, little bursts of damage, and then this is going to be really bad against things that can one-shot your Exeggutor EX. So moving on to Tier 2, we got 4 decks in Tier 2. We have Darkrai Magnezone, Darkrai Greninja, Marshadow Magnezone, and Charizard EX. So let's go ahead and take a look at Darkrai Magnezone first. This is what people are calling, you know, one of the strongest decks in the game right now. And let's take a look at this sample deck real quick. Honestly, I feel like there's not too much to talk about here, since if you've played Pokemon Pocket at all recently, you just kind of know what this deck is already. It's all over tournaments. It's all over ladder, right? So this deck essentially just chips away at you with the Darkrai ability, and then you have the Druddigon up front. That way you can build up your Darkrai and your Magnezone. And usually by the time Magnezone is online, your Pokemon is within lethal range of that 110 damage. A couple Research, couple Leaf, a Cyrus, a Giovanni. I will say I don't see a lot of Giovannis in these types of decks, but then there are a couple Pokeballs, one Giant Cape, one Pokemon Communication. I could see Giovanni making sense paired with the Magnezone to push it to 120, since a bunch of Pokemon in the game do have 140 HP, so if you do like 20 damage with Darkrai ability and then 110 plus the Giovanni, we'll push that to 120 plus the Darkrai, we'll push it to 140 total. So I guess that can make sense there. And yeah, not too much else to talk about this deck list. I think this deck is pretty much solved at this point, with maybe a couple differences in some of the trainer cards. And let's take a look at the matchup win rate percentage. So best matchups, Mewtwo EX. This has a staggering 78% win rate over Mewtwo EX. Mewtwo EX was one of the best decks, if not the best deck in the game, the past two expansions, but it just gets absolutely destroyed by Darkrai due to the dark type weakness, right? Mewtwo decks are weak to dark type, so Mewtwo has just fallen off the meta completely at this point. Darkrai has taken over its spot essentially, so that makes sense there. 73% win rate over Dialga EX and Melmetal. I think it's probably just due to the fact that Dialga is it's not as good as we thought it would be. Like, you can ramp energy with it, but you need to attach 2 energy onto the Dialga and then you can start ramping energy. So compared to Darkrai, it's still a little bit slow compared to the Darkrai, which only takes 3 energy to attack, and then when you're attaching energy to that Darkrai, you're dealing 20 damage as well. So yeah, I think that makes sense here. And then Darkrai does have 140 HP, so it does not even get one shot by Dialga or Melmetal. 62% win rate into Weavile EX, 61% win rate into Dialga and Mega EX, and a 58% into Palkia EX. And then the worst matchups here are going to be fighting decks, actually. Marshadow, Magnezone, only a 30% win rate. This makes sense. If you watch my last video talking about the Gallade EX deck I played, Darkrai Magnezone was actually a pretty good matchup for me, since Magnezone is weak to fighting type Pokemon. So fighting type decks don't really have a problem with playing against this deck, since you can take down Magnezone pretty easily, or sometimes you can take down even the Magnemite or Magneton before it even evolves into Magnezone, which is very, very powerful. And then it actually has a 40% win rate into the Darkrai Greninja version, which is kind of interesting. But I think this does sort of make sense, as the Greninja version can kind of just chip away at you, right, with the Darkrai and the Greninja, whereas this one just chips away at you with Darkrai and, well, I guess Druddigon as well, right? But if your opponent is playing smart, they're probably not going to attack into the Druddigon. So the thing is, if you just have Druddigon in your active spot as the Darkrai Magnezone player and you're playing against a Darkrai Greninja, well, they're doing more chip damage than you, right? Because you're doing 20 damage per turn each energy you put on your Darkrai, but they're doing 40 damage per turn if they're adding an energy on their Darkrai, and then they're dealing 20 damage from their Greninja. And then they could potentially have 2 Greninjas on board as well, right? So that would be 60 damage per turn, which is pretty nuts. So to me, that does make sense. They're just essentially just doing more chip damage than you per turn. All right, now moving on, we are going into Darkrai EX Greninja. This deck is very strong as well. I will say I have seen people play more Kangaskhan lately over the Druddigon. This deck right here, actually, from that same Monday meta tournament, this one is running only 1 Druddigon. It's running 2 Greninja lines, 2 Darkrai EX, 2 Research, 2 Leaf, 2 Cyrus. Double Cyrus in this deck does make sense, since you are doing a lot of chip damage with Greninja, Darkrai, and Druddigon. So double Cyrus does make sense over, say, like 1 Cyrus, 1 Sabrina. Double Pokemon Communication, so you can find your Greninja line easier, and then 1 potion just for some healing. So this one is running 1 copy of the Druddigon. I'm going to look at some other decks, actually. This one is running 2 copies of Druddigon. I want to see, yeah, here we go. This one is running 2 copies of Kangaskhan. And if you watch my last video, I ran into someone who was playing this deck, the Kangaskhan version over the Druddigon version. And you know what? In some instances, it does make sense since Kangaskhan is more proactive, meaning that you can actually attack with Kangaskhan. With this version, you can't attack with the Druddigon since you're just only running dark energy, right? So with this one, you can actually attack with the Kangaskhan, and it's a little bit more proactive. You know, I'm actually kind of surprised that the Kangaskhan version did so well. This person got top 32 in this tournament with them, so congrats to them. And I think Kangaskhan combined with the Rocky Helmet is actually particularly strong, right? Because if you say, let's say you have a Druddigon and you put a Rocky Helmet on it, your opponent's going to take 40 damage each time they attack it. Well, they're just not going to attack into it until they have a way to clear it like in one hit, right? Or they swap it out with a Sabrina or something. But the thing is, with the Kangaskhan, if you put a Rocky Helmet on the Kangaskhan, it's like, well, your opponent's kind of damned if they do, damned if they don't, right? If they attack into Kangaskhan, they're taking damage from the Rocky Helmet. If they don't attack your Kangaskhan, then Kangaskhan can actually fight back, right? So I think Kangaskhan with the combination of Rocky Helmet actually makes a lot of sense here, and I'm interested in seeing more, you know, tournament placements with this deck. Now, there's not enough data on the win rate percentages here. I assume because this version is less popular than the Magnezone version that there's not really enough data to go off of, but I still really like this version a lot here. And yeah, I recommend trying it out. Give it a try. Try it with the Kangaskhan instead of the Druddigon, and let me know how you like it. Now moving on to the next deck in Tier 2, we got Marshadow Magnezone. So this is essentially just a fighting toolbox sort of deck with Magnezone thrown in here. So this is one that got top 32 in a tournament of 286 players. It's running 2 of the Magnezone lines, and then it is running 2 Marshadow and 2 Hitmonlee. What I will say real quick is I don't know if this deck is actually running fighting and lightning energy, because they're running this Magnemite, which kind of signals to me that they're running lightning energy. But I guess you could run this deck one of 2 ways, just with fighting energy only or lightning and fighting. But to me, I think it makes sense to just run fighting energy only, and then you can just run the other Magnemite that attacks for colorless energy. But essentially, this deck, all it wants to do is just sort of start off with the Hitmonlee. You just want to start chipping away at your opponent's bench. Once Hitmonlee gets KO'd, then usually by then either you have Magnezone online or you have Marshadow online. And I will say Marshadow is not as good, unfortunately, in this format as it was the last format. And the reason for that is because we have so many ways that Pokemon are getting KO'd now without actually getting KO'd by attacks. So for example, Darkrai, right? Darkrai, every time you put an energy on him, it's dealing 20 damage. That does not activate Marshadow's ability, because Marshadow's ability only activates when your Pokemon was knocked out by an attack from your opponent's active Pokemon. So it's not going to get activated from Darkrai. It's not going to get activated from like a Rocky Helmet, a Druddigon, or Greninja, things like that, right? It actually has to be attacked in order to activate the Marshadow. That's why it's not as good as this format. It's still a good card, just not as good. Then you have a couple double Cyrus in here. Does make sense with the Hitmonlee. You know, you attack the bench, pull its active spot with Cyrus. 2 Pokeballs, 2 XP, 2 Pokemon Communication for some consistency. And let's take a look at some other versions of the deck here. Yeah, this one is running the colorless Magnemite. I think this one makes more sense. Just run fighting energy, right? Since Magneton can generate lightning energy on his own. And this one is running 1 copy of Hitmonchan, which I actually really like Hitmonchan, this format. It's essentially like a Farfetch, but it deals 10 less damage, but it has 20 more HP. And I think in this format, with so many things doing chip damage like Darkrai, I think that 20 HP is more valuable than the 10 damage. This means that this can survive like an extra turn, and in turn, that gives you an extra turn. I said turn so many times there. This gives you an extra turn, essentially, to get your Magnezone online, right? Since it has 80 HP rather than 60 HP. And yep, the rest of the decks are gonna kind of look similar from here on out. Now with this deck, we do have data on the matchup win rate percentage. It's going to have a really, really good matchup into Gyarados EX, 84% win rate. That is, of course, due to the fact that Hitmonlee can one-shot Magikarp before it even evolves. This one's going to have a 74% win rate into Charizard EX, and that is due to the fact that Hitmonlee can go ahead and just attack the Charmander on the bench. Sometimes you can KO it before it even evolves, or you can just rush them down before they can get Charizard online. So yeah, you are going to be favored into Charizard EX with this deck, and Moltres is weak to Lightning, which Magnezone is a Lightning type Pokemon, by the way. And then you are going to be favored into Darkrai Magnezone. Again, Magnezone is weak to fighting type Pokemon, so of course fighting Pokemon are going to be favored here. And then your worst matchups are Celebi Exeggutor EX with a 20% win rate. I talked about this when talking about the Celebi Exeggutor deck, but again, essentially, you don't have a way to cleanly get rid of that Exeggutor in one hit, so it's just going to punish you and just, beat you down until you lose. And then it has a 47% win rate against Darkrai Greninja decks. All right, and then lastly in Tier 2, we got Charizard EX. So Charizard EX, it's essentially pretty much the same as the last format, except people got rid of the Arcanine line and just threw in more trainer cards, right? Let's look at this second place deck here. This got second place in that Monday meta tournament. So it's running 2 Charmanders, 2 Charmeleon, 2 Charizard EX, 2 Moltres, 2 Research, 1 Leaf, 1 Sabrina, 1 Dawn, 2 Pokeball, 2 Pokemon Communication, 2x Speed, and 1 Giant Cape. So yeah, this deck is very, very simple in its game plan. All you want to do is just start off with Moltres in your active, Charmander in your bench, ramp energy with the Moltres onto the Charmander, and evolve into Charizard EX. Very, very simple game plan, but this deck did get a little bit better with things like the Pokemon Communication, since it does make this deck a little bit more consistent finding your pieces for your Charizard EX line. We do have the Dawn as well, since Charizard EX, you are going to discard 2 fire energy whenever you use that Crimson Storm ability. So what you can do is something like, if you have a bunch of energy on your Moltres, you can retreat the Moltres, and then you can use Dawn to transfer energy from the Moltres to your Charizard to maybe get Charizard online active a turn earlier than you would have before. And you're running only 1 Leaf but double X speed here. The reason for this is because it's actually more important to get the Moltres in the active spot first. So let's say, for example, you start off with just a Charmander on your first turn, but then you draw into a Moltres. Well, in that case, you want to use the X speed on your Charmander to swap out Charmander, put in Moltres, put in energy on Moltres, and then start using Inferno Dance, right? Whereas you don't want to use Leaf on your Charmander. You can't use Leaf and Professor's Research in the same turn, right? So there may be times where you just have a Charmander, you draw into the Moltres with Professor's Research, and then you can use an X speed to retreat Charmander, put their energy on Moltres. You can't do that with the Leaf, since you can only play 1 trainer card per turn, right? And then the Giant Cape, just for some more extra HP. It does push Moltres up to 160, which is really nice. Gonna put it outside of attacks such as like a Gyarados EX or like a Palkia EX. All right, and the win rates for this one, of course, it's going to have a really good matchup into Celebi, 69% positive win rate. Nothing too crazy there. It's just, just a good matchup type for you, fire versus grass. And then the worst matchups are going to be 38% against Gyarados EX, since Charizard is weak to water, 40% against Darkrai Greninja, and 42% against Darkrai Magnezone. All right, now moving on to Tier 3. We got a bunch of decks in Tier 3. We got Palkia, Gyarados, Pachirisu, Weavile, Lucario, Skarmory, and Exeggutor EX. Let's hop into Palkia EX here real quick, and let's take a look at some of these sample decks. All right, so this is a top 32 placing deck, and this is essentially what I've seen all Palkia decks to be like, right? It's just 2 copies of Palkia, 2 copies of Manaphy, 2 copies of Vaporeon, and 1 Articuno. I have seen people kind of, go off and on with Articuno, maybe no Articuno, maybe 1 Articuno, maybe 2 Articuno, but I think this is the most popular version with 1 Articuno. Essentially, all this deck wants to do is just ramp energy with the Manaphy, move energy around with Vaporeon, and then you can use Palkia's big Dimensional Storm attack for 150 damage while also attacking the bench. And then you can ramp energy with Misty as well as the Manaphy. And then since you're attacking the bench with Palkia and Articuno's ability, you can bring those damage Pokemon to the active spot with Cyrus. You have Leaf just for some pivot ability, Pokeballs, and then the 1 giant cape just for some extra survivability. You could put it on the Manaphy, right, since Manaphy is pretty fragile with only 50 HP, or you can put it on Articuno or Palkia just to get it outside of some of the stronger Pokemon attacks in the game. So I think this deck is good, but it's just, I don't know, I'm just still not really a fan of water decks that play Misty. I mean, this deck doesn't really need to rely on Misty anymore since we can ramp energy more reliably with the Manaphy, but still I feel like sometimes this deck can feel just a little awkward sometimes if you don't draw the correct pieces you need, right? Like if you don't draw the Manaphy, or if you have an Eevee, you don't draw the Vaporeon to move your energy around, or if you get a Misty and then you just flip nothing but tails. Like, I don't know, I feel like this deck is a very polarizing deck, whether it wins like really hard or it loses really hard. So personally, I'm not like a big fan of this deck, but that's just me personally. Let's go ahead and take a look at the win rates here. So this is going to have a good win rate into Mewtwo EX, of course, that is since Palkia can one-shot Mewtwo. Good matchup into Celebi, and good matchup into Weavile, and then it's going to have a bad matchup into Darkrai Magnezone with a 39% win rate, and that is due to the fact that, of course, Magnezone is a lightning type Pokemon, and your Pokemon are weak to lightning. So not too much else to say about this deck here. I think it is a good deck, but it's not, it's not a top tier. I think tier 3 is a good spot to put it. All right, now moving on to Gyarados EX. So Gyarados EX has kind of fallen off a little bit. It was one of, if not the best deck of the last format. I know I kind of say that for a bunch of decks, right? It's kind of hard to say what was the best deck of the last format. It was kind of a toss-up between Gyarados, Mewtwo, Pikachu, and kind of Celebi as well, right? And even like Charizard. So there were like 5 like top different meta decks, but anyways, that was the last format. Let's talk about Space-Time Smackdown, the current format. So this is the Gyarados deck, which is essentially the same from the last format. The only difference here is that they're running 1 Cyrus instead of 2 Leaf. So that does make sense since you're able to chip away at your opponent's Pokemon with Druddigon or Greninja, pull it to the active with Cyrus, and then just win the game with your Gyarados. Yeah, I think this is still a good deck, but yeah, I think it definitely has fallen off a bit. Magikarp is still vulnerable to Hitmonlee, which a lot of decks are running Hitmonlee right now. There's a good variety of fighting decks out there. And Gyarados EX, while it does 140 damage, it can clear a lot of things in the game in one hit. Now that we have Giant Cape, we can actually push a bunch of Pokemon outside of this range, right? Because there's a lot of EX Pokemon in the game that have 140 HP, like let's say Darkrai, for example. You put a Giant Cape on it, it goes to 160 HP. Your opponent is no longer one-shotting you with Gyarados EX. So I think the introduction to Magic Cape made this deck slightly worse, and also due to the fact that a lot of people are playing Hitmonlee, the Magikarp can get sniped kind of easily. And yeah, I think if you're playing this deck, I think you could probably just, you just swap Gyarados and Magikarp into like Darkrai, and this is just a probably just better deck, right? You just play Darkrai Greninja instead because that's how powerful Darkrai is. I mean, when you think about it, like Darkrai, it deals 20 damage each time you put an energy on it, and it takes 3 energy to attack, and it deals 80 damage. So for total, you attach 3 energy, that's 60 damage, plus the 80, that's 140. It's essentially doing the same amount of damage as Gyarados EX, just kind of split up into chunks, right? It's still doing 140 damage, but Darkrai is a basic, so you don't have to evolve it. You don't have to rely on a basic and then an evolution, right? So Darkrai EX is more consistent in that sense. I think that's why this deck has fallen off a little bit. And looking into the win rates here, it has a good matchup into Mewtwo EX. That's no surprise. Same thing since last season. Good matchup into Celebi since it can one-shot Celebi. Good matchup into Charizard since water beats fire, of course. And then a bad matchup into Palkia EX since, yeah, that does make sense since the Palkia can potentially ramp energy faster than you with the Manaphy and the Misty. And they could potentially just take down your Pokemon before they even get going. All right, next up in tier 3 is Pachirisu. Now, I was a big fan of Pikachu EX decks last format. That was like my go-to like sort of tournament deck last format, and I have not pulled this Pokemon at all. I am so upset. I have like 5 Yan Megas, no Pachirisus, man, but that's just a little side rant, okay? Anyways, let's talk about Pachirisu EX. So this guy is the new lightning type EX Pokemon. If you don't know what he does, he has 120 HP. For 2 lightning energy, does Sparking Gadget, which does 40 damage, but if it has a Pokemon tool attached, it does 40 more damage for a total of 80 damage. So kind of similar to Pikachu EX, where Pikachu EX scales with lightning Pokemon on your bench. This kind of just does more damage if you have a Pokemon tool attached. And what we have seen people play is essentially these 18 trainer sort of decks with Pachirisu, right? You're just running a bunch of trainer cards here. We got double Sabrina, double Giovanni, double Cyrus, even a blue in here. And then you're running the trainer cards, so double Rocky Helmet, double Giant Cape, and even 1 Lumberry. Actually don't even see people play this berry at all. I think this format is not necessarily the best format for this card, but I could see this card being more valuable if other cards that apply status conditions like poison or sleep, become more popular in the future. But as of right now, Giant Cape and Rocky Helmet are the better Pokemon tools. So yeah, this deck is pretty straightforward. You just start off with a Pachirisu, attach a Pokemon tool to it, and you just get to attacking. That's pretty much it. There are a couple different versions though. This one got top 8 in a 192 player tournament. This one's a little bit different, running double copies of Zapdos and a 1 Mew, and then this one does get rid of the Lumberry and the blue. Yeah, I think these cards like blue, Lumberry, you're only going to see them like in these 18 trainer cards, but once you like add more Pokemon, you're going to start cutting some of those lesser played cards here. I want to see like this one's different as well. This one is Blitzel Zebstrika, running a 1 basic Pikachu and 1 Raichu. I'm going to be honest, I'm not convinced we have seen the best version of Pachirisu yet. This one's running Magnezone, which, Magnezone is just a good card. You can literally put Magnezone in anything, right? So this could actually be really good as well. I like the Spiritomb tech. You can damage your opponent's bench Pokemon with Spiritomb, bring it to active with Cyrus, and then KO it with either Magnezone or Pachirisu. I like this version a lot, actually. This actually looked really fun to play. I'm so sad I did not pull this guy. I wish we could trade cards from the new set, man. I'm so sad. But once I do pull this guy, I am definitely going to cook with him because I really like lightning type decks in this game. So that's it. There are a couple different ways to play this guy. I think right now the most popular is going to be something like this one, the 18 trainer version. Maybe not this exact version, like this one is actually running a red card, which again, red card is more of a tournament card. I would not recommend it playing just random matches. But that is Pachirisu EX. It's going to be good into the water decks, of course, because of the type advantage there, but it's going to be weak against those fighting decks, which there are a pretty decent amount of fighting decks right now. And there are no win rate percentages available for Pachirisu EX, but again, I think it's just going to be that, you know, this is good into water decks such as like Palkia, right? And then this is going to be bad into things like Exeggutor EX, since you don't have a way to cleanly deal with Exeggutor EX, and then this is going to be naturally bad into those fighting decks, right? Moving on, we got Weavile EX. So when this expansion first came out, you know, people thought Darkrai Weavile was going to be the best deck, but it turned out, you know, more people are shifting to Darkrai Magnezone now, and even Darkrai Greninja. But I think Darkrai Weavile is still really good. Going first with this deck is like one of the strongest plays in the game, right? You start off with a Sneasel in your active spot and a Darkrai on your bench, put an energy on Darkrai, move it to the active spot with the Dawn, and then attack with the Weavile for 70 damage, plus the 20 damage from Darkrai for a total of 90 damage on just your second turn. Going first is absolutely nuts, right? And with this deck, you don't actually really need any other Pokemon other than Darkrai and Weavile, which allows you to play a bunch of trainer cards here. You got Cyrus, you got Dawn, you got Leaf, Sabrina, Pokeballs, you got 1x speed, 1 giant cape. So yeah, this is a pretty good looking deck here. Again, this is just going to struggle against those grass type decks though, because Weavile and Darkrai are both weak to grass. So that's why I think people have leaned into playing Exeggutor EX more. And yeah, most of these decks are just essentially just playing the Darkrai and the Weavile line, and then just a bunch of trainer cards. Okay, we do have data for the win rates here, so let's take a look into it. 82% win rate into Mewtwo EX. No surprise there. Mewtwo is weak to Dark type. Bad matchup into Celebi EX. Again, it's going to be bad against those grass type decks. Bad matchup into the Magnezone version, which, yeah, I could see that because, you know, Weavile EX can, once you chip it down a bit, it can get into one-shot range of that Magnezone EX, and then a pretty low win rate into Palkia EX as well. All right, we're moving through. We're moving through tier 3, almost done. So we got Lucario up next. There's no win rate percentages on this one, but let's take a look at a couple sample decks. The thing with Lucario is that he's actually not like the main card in these decks. He's really a supporter card, right? Because of his ability, he's going to buff your fighting Pokemon by 20 additional damage. So this guy, usually just kind of want him chilling on the bench. You don't really attack with him unless you have to, right? So a lot of people are opting to play this with a bunch of different fighting cards. One of them being Rampardos. I think Rampardos is actually really good. For only 1 energy, it does 130 damage, which is nuts. If I'm not mistaken, this is the most damage you can do in the game for 1 energy currently, but there is a drawback, of course. It is a stage 2 evolution Pokemon, and if your opponent's Pokemon is knocked out by this attack, this Pokemon also does 50 damage to itself. But it's not an EX Pokemon, so if this gets KO'd, then, you know, it's only worth 1 point. So Rampardos might be the strongest Pokemon to pair with Lucario. You also have Hitmonchan in here as well, which Hitmonchan is really good with Lucario, man. I think Hitmonchan is like the biggest winner of these Lucario decks, actually, because Hitmonchan, you know, 80 HP, 30 damage, 1 energy, not too bad, right, for a basic Pokemon. But if you have Lucario on the board, 80 HP, 50 damage for 1 energy for a basic Pokemon, now that's really, really good. And then these effects can stack as well. So if you have 2 Lucario on the board, you're dealing 70 damage with the Hitmonchan, which is pretty damn nuts. And then also with the Rampardos, if you have 1 Lucario, you're dealing 150. If you have 2 Lucario, you're dealing 170, which is an absurd amount of damage for only 1 energy. And then rest of the trainer cards, pretty standard stuff here. Double Pokemon communication makes sense, just for the extra consistency. And then I just want to look at some other versions of this deck real quick. This one's running 1 Marshadow, 1 Hitmonlee instead of the Hitmonchan. This one is running 1 Hitmonchan, 1 Marshadow, 1 Hitmonlee. This one's running the Mankey Primeape, actually, which is pretty interesting. This is the Primeape from Mythical Island that does 50 damage, so this is really good for going first. So yeah, this is actually really, really nice. I like that Lucario can be fit into a bunch of different fighting decks, essentially. All right, and now moving on to Skarmory. So Skarmory, this guy is actually pretty cool. I actually like Skarmory a lot. I haven't really played with him myself, but from what I've seen, he seems pretty fun to play. I played against this deck a lot, though. Essentially, all this is Skarmory is just a really aggressive Pokemon for going second, right? He's kind of just like a better Farfetch'd in some instances because he has 80 HP. He's a basic Pokemon. He attacks for 1 energy for 20 damage, but if he has a Pokemon tool attached, he's attacking for 50 damage. So if he has a Pokemon tool attached to him, he's essentially a buffed up Farfetch'd, and then you could put the giant cape on him to either give him more HP, or if you combine him with a Rocky helmet, you're dealing 50 damage, and then when you take damage, you're dealing 20 back, which is pretty nuts, right? So you're dealing damage with Skarmory in your front line, you're building up your Magnezone in your back line, and then this one's running a 1 of Spiritomb with the double Cyrus combo. So yeah, this deck is really cool. It's just a really aggressive deck, right? This one is kind of similar, except it's running a Heatran over the Spiritomb, and I think Heatran makes sense. It's just another sort of strong attacker in this deck, right? Since Skarmory is sort of like your early to mid game attacker, Magnezone is like your mid to late game attacker, and then Heatran is another late game attacker for 3 energy. It's going to deal 110 damage, but then do 20 damage to itself. But if it gets KO'd, it's not that big of a deal since it is a 1 prize point Pokemon, right? So just another backup attacker that can deal a lot of damage in 1 hit. And looking through the rest of the decks here, they're pretty similar, just a couple differences on some of the trainer cards, like maybe different numbers of Sabrina or Cyrus here. This one's actually a little bit different. This got top 32, 190 player tournament. This one is Skarmory with Pidgeot, which is just the basic Pidgeot, not Pidgeot EX. So this is all a 1 prize point Pokemon deck, meaning your opponent has to KO 3 of your Pokemon to actually win the game. And this can be very powerful, the basic Pidgeot with its ability. Its ability is essentially just Sabrina, just baked in, right? So this kind of opens up deck building a little bit more with Pidgeot, since it essentially has Sabrina built into it. You don't need to run Sabrina in your deck, right? So this gives you more opportunity to run things like Giovanni, right? Or like the X Speed or the Pokemon Communication. So yeah, this version's actually pretty cool too. I'm actually curious to see how the matches actually went for this one. But overall, Skarmory is just essentially just a good sort of aggressive basic Pokemon, right? That can be paired with a bunch of different Pokemon. We got paired with the Magnezone. The person before had it paired with the Pidgeot. So a lot of different things you can do with Skarmory. Let me know what version of Skarmory you guys like the most, actually, because I definitely want to build a Skarmory deck myself. Now, we don't have any win rate data on the Skarmory decks, but I assume it's going to be bad into those Exeggutor decks, since, again, it doesn't really have a way to cleanly get rid of Exeggutor EX in 1 hit. But I think it's going to be good into some of those other decks. Maybe not so good into fighting decks. I guess depending on which version you're running, right? Like if you're running the Magnezone version, it's not going to be as good against the fighting decks. But if you're running like that Pidgeot version, then that might actually be good against those fighting decks, since you are weak to lightning type Pokemon. Oh, that is actually one thing I forgot to mention, is that Skarmory is weak to lightning. So this is going to be kind of weak into those Magnezone decks, which there are a lot of right now. So yeah, that's kind of the reason why Skarmory is not higher up on the tier list. I think is due to the lightning weakness. A lot of people are running Magnezone right now, so yeah, this is naturally going to have a bad matchup into Magnezone decks. All right, and finally, last but not least, in tier 3 we have Exeggutor EX. So I think, yeah, this is going to be the Exeggutor Yan Mega version, it looks like. So the other one we saw that was in tier 1, that's the Exeggutor Celebi version. This is going to be a little bit different. This is running Exeggutor and Yan Mega EX I think this version is not performing as well as the Exeggutor Celebi version due to the fact that this one runs more Pokemon cards. Actually means that you're running less trainer cards, right? So with the other version of Exeggutor EX, it was just 5 Pokemon, right? It was like 2 Exeggutor EX, and then the 1 Celebi or maybe 1 Mew. But this one is running 8 Pokemon, so you're running less trainer cards here. You're only running 1 of Cyrus, 1 of Sabrina, and I think the trainer cards are actually what makes this deck really, really strong. So yeah, Mega, it is still a good card for 3 energy, dealing 120 damage. And the fact that it has a lightning type weakness means that this deck is, it doesn't completely lose to fire type decks, since Exeggutor EX is weak to fire. In that case, you can just pivot into the Yanmega EX, right? This deck is still good, but I think what makes the other version better essentially is just that it runs more trainer cards, which it can use more effectively. And let's take a look at some other versions here. Yep, kind of similar stuff here, just maybe a couple slight differences in trainer cards. This one's running only 1 Yanmega line. I'm not sure how much I like this one. Got top 16, only 64 players though, so sort of a small sample size there. This one's running Leafeon, interestingly enough. I will admit I have not seen the Leafeon Exeggutor tech. This got top 32 in a 190 player tournament, so congrats to them. I have actually not seen this deck as of yet, so wonder how those matchups went. This one, another Yanmega version, got top 4, 190 player tournament, so yeah, this one got first, this one got first. Oh, this one got first actually in the Urgency Day Pocket Weekly, was the Exeggutor Yanmega EX. So this is the biggest tournament every week, right, with over 1,000 players, and this one did get first place here. I do like the double Rocky Helmet. Rocky Helmet on Exeggutor EX is pretty nasty. Like I was saying, if your opponent doesn't have a way to get rid of this in one hit, like a Charizard EX, you put Rocky Helmet on Exeggutor EX, and he's just getting so much value for you each time your opponent attacks into him, and then you can just keep him healed with Erica, which is pretty disgusting. So I think this version is strong, but I think as time goes on, we're going to be seeing more of that tier 1 Exeggutor that we were looking at earlier that plays less Pokemon. This one's a little bit different. It's running 1 of the Mythical Island Exeggutors, and I think it's essentially just a backup in case you don't find the Exeggutor EX. Like, just having this is better than just the Execute, right? Since it has only 50 HP, like, you need to evolve this guy. If you don't evolve this guy, like, you're kind of screwed, right? And then this one is running 1 copy of Mew EX instead of Yanmega or a Celebi, which can be good to copy things like a Palkia or a Charizard, right? And no win rate percentage data available for this deck, but I assume it's pretty similar to the Exeggutor Celebi version. It's going to have a good matchup into those dark type decks. All right, and those are the meta decks. There is a tier 4, I will say, but it has a bunch more decks. I'm not going to go into tier 4 because this would be a 2-hour long video. I feel like this video is already long enough. So tier 4, we'll consider this the honorable mentions category. I'm not going to go into detail on all of those decks, but if you want to look into them, hey, you know what? You go ahead, you do you. Again, I'll leave a link to this website down in the description below. You got some other decks in here, such as Galade EX, and I gotta toot my horn a little bit here. I ain't gonna lie. You see my name right there, top 32 J Hugs. Yes, Frog X Weekly, 760 players. Thank you. I gotta hype myself up a little bit because if I don't, then who will? So I talked about this deck a ton in my last video. Go check that out. But anyways, there's a bunch of other decks here in tier 4, and yeah, I think the meta is still evolving. So don't be discouraged by, like, let's say you're playing a deck, you're having really fun, and you found that it was like tier 3, tier 4, like who cares? This is a meta report, but I mean, at the end of the day, like, it's just a Pokemon card game, dude. Like, just play whatever you have fun with, right? That's why I played Galade EX in that tournament, because I had a lot of fun with this Pokemon. I think this Pokemon is a lot of fun. I think something like Charizard is actually really boring to play, right? That's just my opinion. Kind of unfortunate because Charmander is my favorite Gen 1 starter, and Charizard EX decks, I just find them to be so boring to play, unfortunately. But anyways, that's enough yapping from me. Let me know what you think about this tier list. Again, link to the website will be down in the description below. I'm gonna have timestamps down for everything down as well, so if you want to jump to any part of this video and check out any specific deck over again, you know, you can go ahead and click on the timestamp. And thank you guys so much for watching. I know this was a long one, so if you stuck with me all the way to the end, you're a real one. And you know what, give me a little keyword in the comments to show that you stay to the end with me. The secret word will be diamond. So if you stuck all the way to the end of the video, type in diamond somewhere in the comments. I'll know you stayed to the end and you are a real one for that. So thank you guys so much for watching. Appreciate you, and I will see you all in the next one. Later.